The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Cedar Falls, a frontier town that had seen better days. The drought of '73 had broken more than just the land. It had broken spirits, emptied pockets, and driven desperate families to measures they'd never dreamed possible. The air hung heavy with dust and despair, and that morning, the crowd gathering outside the general store carried both. Sarah Ann O'Connell stood on the rough wooden platform, her worn calico dress hanging loose on her thin frame. The fabric clung to her in the dry wind as she fought to keep her chin up. Her stomach churned, her hands trembled, but she forced them to clasp tightly in front of her. She wouldn't let these people, her neighbors, see her break. The auctioneer, Silas Wetherbe, a stout man with sweat darkening his collar, cleared his throat and wiped his brow. Even he seemed uneasy about what was about to happen, though not enough to walk away from the money it would bring. "Gentlemen," he called out, his voice echoing across the square, "we commenced this morning with the arranged marriages auction." The words rolled through the air like thunder. Sarah could feel eyes on her from every direction, some curious, some judging, some pitying. Her mother stood at the edge of the crowd, weeping silently into a faded handkerchief. Her father stood beside her, jaw locked tight, staring into the distance like he couldn't bear to see what was happening. Patrick O'Connell had once been a proud man, a farmer who'd built his life from sweat and soil. But 3 years of failed crops had stripped him of pride and home alike. The bank had taken their land. The drought had taken their hope. Now this, selling his daughter for passage to California, was all he had left. Miss Sarah Ann O'Connell. Wetherbe announced, reading from his ledger, age 19, good Irish stock, can read, write, and count, skilled in household duties. Family seeks $40 to cover debts and passage west. $40. That was the price of her family's survival and the cost of her freedom. $30, called a voice from the crowd. Heads turned. The bidder was a shopkeeper from the next town over, known for driving his first wife into an early grave. $35, came another call, a miner, his beard gray and filthy, his breath sour even from 10 feet away. Sarah's heart thudded in her chest. Each voice was another nail sealing her fate. Then came a deeper voice, calm but commanding. $40. The crowd parted as the man stepped forward. Sarah looked up, and the world seemed to still. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a buckskin jacket worn smooth with age. His face was carved by sun and wind, his dark hair streaked with gray, but it was his eyes that stopped her, gray as storm clouds, cold and unreadable. Ezekiel Boon. She'd heard whispers of him in town, the mountain man who came down from the Rockies twice a year for supplies, the one who'd lost his wife and child to cholera 5 years back. The one who spoke to no one and trusted even fewer. 40, Wetherbe repeated eagerly. Do I hear 45? Silence. The shopkeeper shifted but stayed quiet. The miner spat and turned away. Sold, Wetherbe declared, to Mr. Boon for $40. The word sold rang in Sarah's ears like a church bell tolling death. Boon stepped forward, boots thudding on the boards, and reached into his coat. He handed Wetherbe a small leather pouch. Gold coins clinked inside. Real gold, not paper promises. He turned to Sarah, his voice rough and low. Get your things. We leave within the hour. Sarah climbed down from the platform, her legs weak beneath her. Her mother rushed forward, sobbing as she pulled her into her arms. My darling girl, she cried, may the Blessed Virgin protect you. Her father approached more slowly, his eyes hollow. He pressed something small into Sarah's hand, her grandmother's rosary. You're an O'Connell, he said quietly. Remember that, no matter where you go. Papa, she began, but he turned away, unable to meet her eyes. She gathered what little she owned, a patched dress, her mother's small Bible, a hairbrush, a family photograph, and packed them into a single canvas bag. When she stepped outside again, Boon was waiting beside a wagon loaded with supplies. You know how to handle a team? He asked. Yes, sir, she whispered. Then drive. I don't ride in wagons." He lifted her into the seat with impersonal hands, then swung into the saddle of his black horse, a massive animal that seemed to mirror its master's strength and silence. As the wagon began to roll, Sarah's mother broke free from her husband and ran forward, clutching at Boon's arm. "Please," she begged, "please be kind to her. She's just a girl. She's innocent." Boon looked down at her with eyes like cold steel. "I bought her for one reason only," he said flatly. "To bear my children and continue my line. Whether she cries or not makes no difference to me. Only my heirs matter." The words hit like a blow. Sarah's mother stumbled back, pale and trembling. Sarah felt something inside her crack, but she kept her head high. She would not cry. "Not here. Move out," Boon ordered. The wagon creaked forward, carrying her away from the only life she'd ever known. At the edge of town, Sarah risked one last glance back. Her parents stood where she'd left them. Her mother collapsed against her father's chest, both growing smaller with each turn of the wheels. They would use the money to start over, but she would never see them again. Beside the wagon, Ezekiel Boon rode in silence, a dark figure against the blazing sun. He'd bought her like flour or coffee, just another item to stock his lonely mountain cabin. Sarah gripped the reins until they cut into her palms. The tears burned behind her eyes, but she swallowed them down. He would not see her break. The road stretched ahead, dusty and endless, winding toward the mountains that loomed like prison walls against the sky. Somewhere up there waited her new life, and the man who owned her. But as Cedar Falls faded behind them, something flickered inside her, a spark of defiance, faint but alive. He might have bought her body, but her spirit was still her own. She would remember who she was. She was still Sarah Ann O'Connell. And she would survive. The wagon wheels groaned as they rolled deeper into the wilderness, each turn carrying Sarah farther from everything she had ever known. The first day passed in heavy silence, broken only by the creak of wood, the plod of oxen, and the occasional cry of a hawk overhead. Ezekiel Boon rode slightly ahead, his back straight, his movements measured. He hadn't spoken since they'd left town, not one word. By noon, the sun burned high and hot. Sarah's bonnet did little to protect her from its glare. Her mouth was dry, her arms ached from holding the reins, but she refused to ask for rest. She wouldn't give him reason to think she was weak. At last, Boon lifted a hand, signaling her to stop near a small creek. He dismounted in one smooth motion, leading his horse to drink. Sarah climbed down stiffly, her legs trembling from hours of sitting still. "Water the oxen," he said without looking at her. "We'll rest here an hour." She nodded and led the animals to the water. Her reflection wavered in the stream. Dusty face, tangled hair, eyes hollow from sleepless nights. She barely recognized herself. When she turned back, Boon was kneeling by his horse, checking the animal's hooves, every movement practiced and efficient. Sarah opened her small bundle and pulled out the last bit of cornbread her mother had packed. It tasted of home and sorrow. "Storm coming," Boon said suddenly, his deep voice startling her. Sarah looked up at the clear blue sky. "Storm? It's near perfect weather." He didn't reply, only kept his gaze fixed westward. She followed it, and saw it then. Dark clouds, low and fast, rolling across the horizon. They were on the trail again before she could ask more. The wind rose, cold and sharp. Within an hour, the sky turned gray, and fat raindrops began to fall. "Keep them moving!" Boon shouted over the growing wind. "We've got to reach the way station!" The oxen struggled through the mud as the storm unleashed its fury. Thunder cracked across the mountains, and lightning lit the sky white as bone. Sarah gripped the reins, every muscle tight with fear. At last, through the blinding rain, a small log structure came into view, a crude way station with a sagging roof and a corral. Boon dismounted and rushed to secure the animals, shouting orders she could barely hear. Inside, the cabin was dark and musty, smelling of smoke and damp wood. Sarah shivered violently, her dress soaked through. She set to work building a fire, her fingers numb and clumsy, while Boon checked the roof for leaks. By the time the fire caught, both were dripping wet. Boon hung his coat on a peg and began unpacking supplies. Beans, salt pork, coffee. "Can you cook?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Then do it." Sarah moved mechanically, too cold to think. She cooked over the fire, the smell of hot food filling the small room. They ate in silence, sitting on opposite benches while rain battered the roof. When she finished cleaning up, she spread her blanket on the far side of the fire. Boon unrolled his bed near the other wall, his rifle within reach. "We leave at first light," he said flatly. Sarah nodded, though her heart pounded. She lay down, staring into the flickering fire. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the trees. She tried to pray, but the words came hollow. Then she heard it. A long, low howl. Wolves. Her body went rigid. "They won't come in." Boon's voice came from the darkness. "They smell human scent. They'll keep their distance." She hadn't realized he was awake. "I wasn't afraid," she lied softly. His tone held no warmth. "You should be. Out here, fear keeps you alive." Silence followed. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the pounding rain. "Mr. Boon," she whispered after a while, "how far is it to your place?" 3 days, maybe 4, depends on the weather." "And there's no one else?" Quote, "Not for 50 miles. His voice grew distant. "That's how I prefer it." Sarah turned her face to the wall, the weight of his words pressing down like the storm outside. She clutched her rosary under the blanket, the smooth beads a small comfort. The rain slowed near dawn. She dozed fitfully and woke to the smell of coffee. Boon handed her a tin cup without a word. They left as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the wet earth gold. For a moment, it was almost beautiful, the air clean and sharp, the mountains glowing in the distance. Sarah caught her breath. "It's beautiful," she said before she could stop herself. Boon turned slightly in the saddle. His expression didn't soften, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Aye," he said quietly, "beautiful and deadly." The next 2 days tested every ounce of strength she had. The trail grew steeper and narrower, twisting through forests and rocky passes. Boon rode ahead, guiding them through terrain that seemed to belong to another world. He spoke only when necessary, but she noticed how he watched the horizon, how his hand never strayed far from his rifle. They camped beneath an overhang one night, the air cold and thin. Sarah built a small fire and warmed her hands. Boon caught fish from the nearby creek and handed one to her on a stick. "Eat," he said. She accepted it carefully. "Thank you." He nodded once. "You did well today. Most folks break before the second day." The simple words of acknowledgement startled her more than his earlier cruelty. "I'll manage," she said softly. He looked at her then, really looked. "We'll see." By the 3rd day, Sarah's hands were blistered from the rains. Her back ached from the endless jolting, but she kept on without complaint. When she thought she couldn't go another mile, the trees opened up, and there it was. The cabin stood in a clearing, framed by mountains that rose like walls of stone. Smoke curled from the chimney. The structure looked sturdy, built to withstand anything nature could throw at it. "Whoa!" Sarah called, halting the oxen. Her voice came out rough. Boon dismounted, his boots sinking into the soft earth. He took in the sight like a man returning to something sacred. "This is home," he said simply. From the barn came movement, a young man lean and dark-haired, with native features and calm eyes. "Jacob 2 Rivers," Boon said. "Helps with the place when I'm gone." "Ma'am," Jacob greeted politely, tipping his hat. "Hello," Sarah replied, uncertain. "Unload the wagon," Boon ordered. "Then you can go, Jacob." Together they carried supplies inside. Sarah followed last, pausing in the doorway. The interior was dim, but warm. A stone fireplace, shelves lined with jars, a table, 2 chairs, a ladder leading to a loft. Everything was orderly, practical, built for survival. "Your things go up there," Boon said. "That's your space." Sarah climbed the ladder, finding a small loft with a straw mattress, a chest, and a single window looking out over the forest. It wasn't much, but after the road it felt almost like sanctuary. When she came down, Jacob was gone, and Boon was stirring a pot over the fire. "Make bread if you can," he said, not looking up. "Flowers in the barrel, starters by the window." Sarah obeyed, working quietly. The cabin filled with the smell of stew and fresh bread. When they ate, neither spoke, but the silence felt different, less hostile, more like a truce. Afterward, Boon showed her the root cellar, the barn, and the smokehouse. He explained each detail: how to care for the animals, where to store supplies, how to survive the mountain winter. "There's no law here," he said at last. "No doctor, no sheriff, no town for 50 miles. Out here, you get hurt, you die. You get lost, you die. You cross the wrong animal, you die." Sarah swallowed hard. "I understand." "Do you?" he asked, stepping closer, his shadow falling across her face. "Come first snow, we might not see another soul for 5 months. Just you and me, can you handle that?" Her voice trembled, but her words didn't. "I'll have to, won't I?" For the first time, something like approval flickered in his cold gray eyes. "Yes," he said quietly, "you will." That night, as the fire burned low, Sarah sat in the loft with her mother's Bible and grandmother's rosary. The wilderness outside howled and groaned, alive with unseen life. She prayed for strength, not deliverance, just strength. And when she blew out the candle, she whispered to herself, "You might own my body, Mr. Boon, but my soul is still mine." Quote. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Winter came early in the mountains that year. The first snow fell in late September, soft at first, then steady, turning the world outside into a white wilderness. Sarah woke to find frost tracing delicate patterns across her window and the sound of silence so deep it felt sacred. "Get up," Ezekiel called from below. "Snow's come." Everything changes now. He was already dressed in heavy furs when she came down, checking the rifles, testing the shutters. The fire blazed bright, but the air still bit cold. "The animals?" she asked, concern rising in her chest. "Already fed," he said, "but we'll move them to the inner stalls before the next storm. This is just the beginning." Sarah soon learned what he meant. Every day was a battle to stay ahead of the cold. Ice had to be broken from the water basin each morning. The chimney needed clearing after every storm. Food had to be rationed carefully. Nothing wasted. Even a short walk outside required tying a rope from the cabin to the barn so they could find their way back if a blizzard came. The isolation was complete. The valley became their entire world. Jacob Two Rivers and his family moved south with the snow, leaving the cabin cut off from everything. Sarah threw herself into work to keep from thinking too much, mending, cooking, chopping wood, tending animals. Ezekiel spoke little, answering questions in short, quiet tones. When he wasn't working, he read by the fire or stared into the flames, lost somewhere she couldn't follow. One evening, after another long day, Sarah couldn't bear the silence anymore. "What do you think about," she asked softly, "when you sit so quiet?" He didn't answer right away. "Things you wouldn't want to hear," he said finally. "Try me." He looked up, studying her face as if deciding whether she was strong enough for truth. "I think about the trap lines that need checking. Whether the roof will hold. Whether the meat will last till spring." He paused. "Sometimes I think about before." Quote, "Your wife," she said gently, his jaw clenched. "Mary." The name came out rough, scraped raw from years of silence. "What was she like?" "Why do you want to know?" "Because I live in her shadow," Sarah said honestly. "Everything here, the way the dishes are stacked, the curtains, the garden, it all speaks of her. I just don't know if I'm doing things wrong." Ezekiel set down the knife he'd been sharpening. For a long moment, he stared into the fire. "She was small," he said finally. "Smaller than you, but strong. Came from farming stock. She made this place feel alive, sang while she worked. The cabin felt warmer when she was in it." Sarah listened in silence. "She and our little girl Lizzie, They both took fever. Nothing I could do. Watched them burn up right in front of me. His voice cracked for the first time since she'd known him. After I buried them, the world went quiet. Too quiet. So I went into the mountains and stayed there until I forgot how to speak. "I'm sorry," Sarah said softly. "Don't be," he muttered. "I don't want pity. Just need heirs. Sons to carry the name, that's all." But that night, when she went to her loft, she found a small wooden box on her blanket. Inside was a fine silver thimble, engraved with flowers, and a set of colorful threads. It was Mary's sewing kit. When she thanked him, he only shrugged. "Shame to let it go to waste," he said, but his eyes didn't quite meet hers. December brought blizzards that howled for days without pause. One morning, a crash outside shook the cabin. The barn roof had caved under the weight of snow. Ezekiel grabbed his coat. "I'll handle it," he said. "You can't go out there. The wind." "Stay inside," he ordered, wrapping a rope around his waist. "If I'm not back in an hour, don't come looking." He stepped into the whiteout, swallowed instantly by the storm. The rope stretched taut for a long time, then went slack. Sarah waited, praying, pacing. 10 minutes. 20. The wind screamed. Fear clawed at her chest. Finally, she wrapped herself in every blanket she could find, tied the rope around her own waist, and plunged into the storm. The cold hit like a knife. The wind tore at her bonnet, stung her eyes. She followed the rope, fighting through drifts up to her waist. The barn loomed out of the white, half buried in snow. Inside, chaos. The cows were panicked. The roof split open, and under a fallen beam, Ezekiel lay still. "No," she gasped, dropping to her knees. His face was pale, blood streaking from his temple. He was breathing, barely. She tried lifting the beam, but it was wedged fast. Inch by inch, she dragged him free, praying with every breath, "Please, please, not like this." Somehow, she got him back to the cabin, half dragging, half carrying. She stripped his frozen clothes, bound his wound with torn linen, and coaxed water between his lips. "Don't you dare die," she whispered fiercely. "You don't get to leave me here alone." He stirred once, muttering in fevered dreams. "Mary, Lizzie." "It's Sarah," she said firmly, wiping his brow. "You're safe. You hear me? You're safe." For 3 days she tended him, feeding him broth, checking his bandages, keeping the fire alive while storms battered the walls. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. When he woke, he found her asleep in the chair beside him, her hands still holding his. "You saved my life," he said quietly. She blinked awake, smiling through exhaustion. "You would have done the same." He shook his head. "No, you could have left, would have been free." "Free?" she echoed. "To die alone out there? No, Ezekiel. I'm not built for that kind of freedom." Something softened in his eyes then, something she hadn't seen before. "Thank you," he said simply. After that, things began to change. Slowly. He let her help with repairs. He showed her how to mend harnesses, how to set traps, how to track prints in the snow. They began talking more. Not much, but enough to bridge the silence that had filled the cabin since she'd arrived. When spring came, the thaw was like rebirth. Water ran everywhere, rushing through the valley. The snow melted from the roof in glittering streams. Sarah planted new seeds in the garden, her hands steady and sure. Ezekiel watched her work, something like pride in his gaze. One morning he stood at the barn door, holding something small. A ring. Plain gold. "Had Jacob fetch it from town last year," he said quietly. "Didn't know who I'd be bringing back. But now I do." Sarah's heart stopped. "You stayed when you could have run. You saved my life. You made this place home again." "I don't want you as property, Sarah. I want you as my wife." Proper. She looked at the ring, then at the man who'd once bought her like cattle, who now stood before her humbled. "Ask me," she said softly, "not as a man claiming ownership, as a man asking a woman." He swallowed hard, voice low and certain. "Sarah Ann O'Connell, will you be my wife, real and true?" She thought of everything, the fear, the storms, the long winter nights, the unexpected kindness. Then she smiled. eyes bright with tears. "Yes, Ezekiel, I will." Their marriage wasn't born of law or convenience anymore. It was forged in hardship, sealed by choice. Months later, when Judge Thornberry rode up to challenge their union, claiming their auction marriage was illegal, Sarah stood her ground. "You can take your papers and your pity," she told the judge, voice steady. "What happened in town was wrong. But what's happened since? That's right. I came here as property, but I stayed as a partner. I choose this life, and I choose this man." Ezekiel's rough hand found hers. "Then let the law catch up to what we already know," he said. The judge married them proper that same day, the law finally catching up with love. Years later, when the snows came again, Sarah sat by the fire with a baby in her arms, a little boy with his father's gray eyes. Ezekiel carved a cradle beside her, his once hard face softened by joy. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Sarah smiled, watching the firelight dance. "Not for a second." Outside, the wind whispered through the pines. Inside, the cabin glowed warm and alive, the sound of love filling every corner where silence once lived. She'd been bought for $40, but she'd stayed for love. And that, in the end, was worth more than all the gold in the Rockies.